Bill Wax is joining us today with 50 years in radio. Bill Wax was the lead DJ and the program director of Sirius XM's B.B. King's Bluesville channel. Bill has interviewed dozens of legendary musicians, including 40 Hours with the King of Blues. As program director, he designed the sound and persona for the station and coached its hosts. Bill currently hosts a Saturday show on WPFW in Takoma Park, Maryland. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Good day, Alex. Thank you very much.
It's so good to have you here. I almost always ask the same question when we get started. How did you get started? So how did you get into radio?
Well, my old-time friends say it was definitely in the cards from the very beginning. Transistor radios and R&B and rock and roll honestly saved my life as a kid. It was my escape from things that weren't so positive in my life, and I could go down and just listen to the music and just get lost and all that. I moved back to Columbia, Missouri. That's where I went to college, got a degree in education, came back east to Washington, D.C., taught for 4 or 5 years, and then moved back to Columbia. And there was a small community radio station there called KOPN. And I started doing a late night rock and roll, oldies, rock and roll R&B radio show.
Now, when you say late night, I've done late night, and my late night was 10 o'clock to 6 a.m. Is it overnight or was it late night?
Late night, even later night, midnight to 3. And normally the station would go off at 3 a.m., except if I felt like going longer, I could go as long as I want. By 6 a.m., someone came in to do the next show. So sometimes I went till 3:30, 4 o'clock. It just depended on how tired I was and what was going on. But so midnight to 3 was the technical time. And I did a show for about 6 months, and the program director retired or moved on. And lo and behold, I applied for the job and got it. I had never really done much radio except that little show for 6 months. And that's how it got started. I was program director in KOPN for 5.5 years, moved to Portland, Oregon, was program director there. All this in community radio, which is a subset of public radio. So those questions about commercial radio, I can do the best I can, but really I've never worked a day in commercial radio. Very lucky on my part, as I see it. XM, satellite radio, it is commercial, but we didn't do commercials, so I didn't have that burden.
And when did you start working at XM?
I started working at XM in late 1999.
Right. And so it's been 25 years ago. Yeah. And what sets XM's away from regular commercial radio?
Well, there were a couple of things. One, no commercials on any of the music channels. So that's number one. There were 2 services, by the way, XM and Sirius. Those of you not familiar with the way the game started. Sirius believed that the only thing wrong with commercial radio was commercials. That if you did the same model but just removed the commercials, everyone would be happy. XM believed that the whole commercial radio was broken and needed to throw the whole thing out and start all over. And so what they did is they hired people like myself who had some radio experience, but also were well-versed in the topic or music that we were going to be in charge of. And then they sat us all down and said, it's yours. You have 24 hours, 7 days a week to program this and make this work. The head of programming explained to us, it's like baseball. If you have 10 ideas and 3 of them become successful, you have been a success. And so batting 300 would be great. Encouraged us to be adventurous, take chances, all kinds of things, and supported us that way and left us alone. I had never had someone all the years I was with XM, which was about 9, come to me and say, you can't do this, or you must do this, or you're not doing this. And they just left me alone and developed the blues channel any way I liked. And I was quite astounded because I thought I was going to have unbelievable interference and got none until Sirius took over, and then they had a different philosophy.
They were like,
just to give you a quick example of the difference in philosophies. When Sirius took over, they said at one point, no station should be playing more than 700 songs a week. Your playlist should be no more than 700 songs a week. You rotate them, whatever, but 700 songs. So they call me into the meeting with the program, person in charge of program, and he tells me this. And I said, what are you talking about? I have categories that have over 3,000 songs in it. There's no way I'm playing just 700 songs each week. I have over 100 years of music. I'm rotating. Said, if you want Bluesville and you kept me on to be Bluesville, there's no way I'm doing 700 songs a week.
How many? Do you know how many you actually did? How many songs that you actually played in any given week?
I mean, different songs. You mean different art?
How many different songs?
I would say
because it's like what, about 400 songs a day. I mean, it's somewhere in that something like that ballpark.
16, 17 songs an hour. You can figure 15, 16 songs an hour, 150. So that's about 300, 400 songs a day. That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
I had different tunes every week, probably somewhere between 2,000 to 2,500 songs a week.
So at 2,000, 2,500, you're not playing very many songs twice. And I think that's because I think that when you think about, I think it sounds like what Sirius was doing is going back into a rotation. They want hot, medium, all those rotations that we would typically recurrent, seasonal recurrent, gold, like those kinds of things. That's what they wanted. And you had a much more eclectic view of that process.
Exactly. And that's what originally I was hired to do. So, yes, it was drastically different. Eventually, the tension between myself and them became to the point with after 13 years, it was like, okay, I don't want to do what you want done. And I really don't want my name on what you want done because I've developed something entirely different. So I just said, I'm 65. I'll just retire.
Yeah.
You're the boss. It's your
But then you
channel.
couldn't give it up. I know how that happened.
Well, I could. You mean I'm still in radio?
Yeah, you're still in radio. You gave up. You didn't want to work with Sirius anymore, so you retired. But I see this happen a lot with folks. They go, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. But it doesn't mean that I don't want to do anything anymore.
And I love radio, and for any number of reasons. And so, yes, this local station I had done radio on before I went to XM had some openings, and so they asked me to come back. I'm a volunteer, don't get paid. I like that. And they give me 2 hours every Saturday and I do what I like.
That's great. And are you, what did you learn doing XM for 9 years? What did you learn did work? Because you said, you could do 3 out of 10 that worked. What worked? What didn't work?
So when we started everything up, one of the first things XM asked of us is decide who we are programming for. And, people said, oh, this audience, this age, whatever. But I decided I was going to program for the musicians. My belief was if the musicians loved what we were doing, everything else would fall into place. The audience would like it. The musicians would be almost proselytizers for what we were doing and it worked. And it's exactly the way it worked. What I found worked not so much. I found being real, not fake voices, fake shtick, just being real, especially in the blues world. It's not commercial radio. It's a much smaller pond. Mm-hmm. There's much smaller interest. And the audience, I would say in some ways, is a bit more educated about the music that they love. And so being just straight out real with them, going out of our way to include the musicians. In other words, a musician would come in and instead of doing a 15-minute interview where you barely could say anything or they could sit or talk about anything, I would have them in and they might stay on the air with me for 3 hours.
Yeah.
So it was the long form interviews the audience loved. The thing is, I found that the audience loved almost everything we attempted to do as long as we were honest and it was real. We were, whether it all worked perfect. For instance, I did a segment weekly where I would pick a song and I would play every version of that song, a blues song, and play every version of that song. It might be 2 hours of the same song, 40 versions of the same song. My initial thought on this was this is going to last 2 weeks. The audience is going to go, no, this is horrible. But that's not how it turned out at all. They loved it.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, they wanted me to repeat it during the week if they missed it when I did it the first time.
Yeah.
So it sort of indicated to me, take the risk, do whatever you think you want to do, but do it honestly, openly, and with a certain amount of integrity. And the audience was going to be there for me.
Yeah, we had a situation at a radio station that I worked at where we got robbed one night, and they stole all the CDs. They left the albums, but they stole all the CDs. And so we got in there. We're like, what are we going to do? And we got in the studio and we just started doing album sides. We just started throwing in album side. And we're just going to play a whole album side because we needed time to think. We're doing the, to figure this out. And then for the next 6 months, people would request, when are we doing another album side morning? Like when we're doing, and you're just like, that was just fixing something. I wasn't going to do that the whole time, but it was, you'd be surprised at how people oftentimes want to slow down, right? Rather than the fast paced commercial radio, I'm going to now jump into this and here it comes and blah, blah, blah. Sometimes people just want to, especially when you're talking about people who are passionate, and when you're in a vertical, a lot of times people they're nerds about that thing, and being you can't, it's hard to out nerd them.
No, you don't even try. At least I don't.
Now you interviewed, you did many interviews. How did you approach those?
Well, I heard a segment that you did a few months ago about interviewing. I wanted to add, first thing is, a great interview, the first skill you must have is to be able to listen. I am amazed how many interviewers do not listen to what the person they're talking to says. They have their list of questions, and that's what they work from. The person answers the first question, and there may be more information or much more exciting if you would listen to follow up on. No, they want to move on to their next question regardless of what the person said. So the first thing was to listen, but because most of my interviews were with musicians, and I've been in radio long enough to know that not every musician is a brilliant talker. They're great players, but they don't necessarily have great verbal skills, or they're not comfortable on that level. So what I would do is with all of them say, hey, send me your list of your 10 favorite songs. And we're going to play those. You're going to play DJ, and we're going to play your favorite songs. And I'm just going to ask you why you love that song. And so I would start most interviews out with that vehicle. And all of a sudden, by the third or fourth song, the musician was much more comfortable. They were having fun. They got to talk about their favorite artists and their favorite songs. And then I could get into, how do you write? What are your issues being on the road? All those other questions I might have wanted to ask, and everyone was comfortable. The other thing is that I always wanted my interviews to sound like myself and the person I was talking to are two old friends in a room where nobody else is, and they're sharing stories back and forth. And that I saw the audience as sort of being a fly on the wall to hear that. And I was able to accomplish that with most of my interviews. And I heard the audience and even the people I interviewed said, man, I just felt like there was no one else there. It was just you and I. And we were just as if we were in a bar sitting at a table talking, which was what, of course, I was trying to accomplish. And so those were at least some of the things that I tried to get out of interviews, and a lot of research. I mean, it's really important to know as much as you can about your subject so that you're not asking the same question over that they've heard 1,000 times and they roll their eyes when you ask it,
You can always tell. That's the hard part is that they're the obvious questions that people ask. And, I used to do interviews all over the radio for bands coming through town and stuff like that. And the first couple were a disaster. I didn't know enough about the band. I was asking, well, how's the tour going? And that all that stuff. And what I found is that if you ask them a question that no one's asked before, like you dig in deep into their whatever, and you pop something out that they haven't had to ask before, they suddenly realize they were somewhere else. Like this is not going to be, this is going to acknowledge something about them that other people interview them. Because a lot of these folks, I mean, we worked with folks that might be doing 5 interviews a day. Like when they're on tour.
And it depends on, especially in like a commercial radio, you have a morning show. They're throwing people through there all the time. You can't possibly know
for like 8-minute hits, or like it's like an 8-minute segment that you're throwing them into. You're not doing. You're not spending an hour with them.
No. So yes, that gets more difficult. And the idea of looking for the question that no one's asked is always a great idea. There was a great old blues band by the name of Honey Boy Edwards, who knew Robert Johnson, who's sort of, if you know blues, is sort of the touchstone for the beginning of blues. Everybody, when they sat down with Honey Boy, first question, tell us about Robert Johnson. Honey Boy immediately would shut up and refuse to really have an interview with them. He was tired of talking about Robert Johnson. He was hoping they wanted to talk about him. Right. So the way I approach it is I ask about other things, like how he went about making moonshine in the 1920s or things. And then he got such a kick out of that. He gave me the recipe. The whole 9 yards. Then he would go in, I even shared some with Robert Johnson one time. Boom. Now I can ask him about Robert Johnson. He was willing and happy to talk about Robert Johnson. Just don't start off with the same question. And then I got all the information you could ever want about Honey Boy and Robert Johnson.
Now, there's a lot of music services out there right now. Do you use any of them, whether it's Apple Music or Spotify or others? Do you listen to any of these?
I hate to say it, I'm a dinosaur. I don't download music. Mm-hmm. I have 45s, albums, cassettes, CDs of these things. And now you want me to pay another time for something I have on 6 different sources as you can see behind me, in my music room. And I'm just not willing at this point. It's not that I think.
My daughter has a very deep, she plays bass guitar, keyboard, and drums.
Wow.
In like 4 different bands. And her knowledge of blues, big band, everything else makes me look like a neophyte. Like I don't understand. Like she knows so much about it. And she's 14 years old. I'm like, she's like an encyclopedia. I mean, she can play you 2 hours of the blues that all or big band or pop or, stuff that you never heard that just came out. And I was like, how do you do that? Like, how do you and she's like, well, I play a song in Apple Music and then I just let it play me a bunch of songs that based on that one song or 2 songs, just keep going. And I just skip through the ones I don't like and grab the ones that I do and put them into playlists, and I listen to them all the time. And that's how she discovers. And it kind of reopened up. I have to admit that process reopened my interest in music. Like I realized I'd been listening to the same playlists and the same music for a decade. And every once in a while a new song would break through because it was popular enough on TikTok or YouTube or whatever. But now yesterday I spent probably 2 hours listening to Brazilian bossa nova. And I'd never done that before, but I was just like, I got into it and I was like, oh, I'm just going to let that play for a while. And it was incredible, and so I think that's the thing that the services provide that you don't have is that they can just keep on telling you things, right?
Well, so here's the thing. Absolutely. And I think that's fabulous. On the other hand, as a programmer or DJ, whatever term you want to use, I feel like when I do a radio show, I'm doing the same thing. I'm as a curator of that music. If downloads and the services do that for you, that's fabulous.
Well, and I don't think they do them as well. Like, I think that there's a power to someone who's listened to something for 40 years or 50 years, and they're saying, hey, I think this is, I'd much rather listen to it DJ do Brazilian bossa nova. And you know, I used to love, you know, I grew up with Rock Over London, you know, like, you know, and hello, this is Graham Dean, and you're listening to Rock Over London, you know, and you'd hear the dongs, and you'd be introduced by curated this new music that's coming out of Manchester or coming out of Liverpool, and here are the new, you know, this is EMF or this is whatever it is, right? And I think that I think that one of the big things missing in those services is the ability to build your own stations. Like, I think that, you know, like being able to create a real station inside of Apple Music and Spotify could, you know, for people like you that have this incredible amount of knowledge of being able to build a station that really sounds like a station that I could turn on 24/7 and listen to it. And it's just something you do because you think it would be fun.
Yes, and I have some friends that are doing that on that level. I'm still doing a show once a week on a radio station that has, you know, hundreds of thousands of listeners, as opposed to being on the internet and having 300 listeners. There's a real difference. And so,
the hard part is that without the partnership with the big services, you can't do it because the internet streaming costs are so high.
Exactly. And the Sirius XM pays by far the most. They're paying over $40 every time they play a record to the artists and the companies that own the rights to the music. I have people that say, well, they're passing that on to the audience instead of them paying it out of their own profits. My feeling is you know what? I'm willing to pay an extra $2 or $3 a month. If a good percentage of money finally ends up in the pocket of the writers and the musicians after decades of it never ending up in their pocket, I'll pay that money happily all the way, because these folks have never really been able to make much of a living. Rock and roll, I mean, pop rock and that kind of stuff made a living, but all the subgenres, I would get a check for 45 cents every 3 months for airplay.
Well, how do blues musicians make money right now?
They make money by touring.
Yeah,
they're not making money by selling their records, and they don't make money really by downloads and on the streaming. They really make money by touring and satellite radio play. If I picked 3 songs from a new record and played it for 3 months, they were getting checks from Sound Exchange, who distributes the money on digital rights. They were getting $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 checks for that, and for somebody that doesn't make a lot of money, makes a big difference.
Absolutely. We've got some questions coming in. Let's go ahead and jump into those questions.
Sure.
The first one comes from Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida. And Andy says, as a program director, how would you keep audiences tuned into a show like Office Hours?
I would make sure I had the best guests I could find,
As you can see, we figured that out. We have you on. So
and I think you guys are brilliant. Now, after we have each patted each other on the back, we can move on. So A, I would make sure that I had great guests. B, the format of this show is a little different. I mean, it's talking heads, and we all sit around and talk. Photos are one thing, and I have a few, and they'll flip them up. For instance, I see the one right now is myself and Buddy Guy doing an interview with Buddy Guy up there. So photos would help. If it was possible to have actual demonstrations of what the person is talking about, I think that would help. And if, for instance, someone like me, or you're talking to someone who's involved with music or maybe podcasting in their pods, excerpts of that, I think, would help so that people could hear the actual work as opposed to someone talking about the work. But honestly, making talking heads really interesting really depends on who the talking heads are.
Well, you always get into this thing. So we acknowledge that 80% of the folks that watch our show listen to it. They don't watch it. And so there's this chicken or egg thing. Is like, do they only listen to it because we don't do much visuals, or if we did the visuals, would they just keep on listening anyway? And you don't really know until you dig into that. But it's one of those things that you have to, like, one of the things we stress with people is, like, your camera can be okay, but we really need you to have a good mic, because people are listening to this in their headphones. They're listening to it in their house. They're listening to it, and we want to make sure that I have to admit that I'm painfully sensitive. Like I won't even listen to phoners anymore. Like I just, I'm like life's too short to listen to someone talk through a phone. Like
I try to avoid phoners myself as much as possible. And I can bear witness to your all's importance of both sound, but also pictures, because I know how much it took to set up for me to do this segment with you. And when this is the second microphone and technical stuff that we did to get it just right. And I appreciate that very much. And if you can make me sound good, you've done a great job.
We always joke, it's easy to make content or it's easy to watch content, but it's very rarely both.
Yes.
So, next question.
It comes from Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada. And for those of you who are listening and not seeing, there's a large black guitar hanging over his shoulder. And the question is, that can't be Lucille behind you, can it?
As a matter of fact, it is Lucille.
Can you tell us a little bit about Lucille?
I would love to tell you the story. I'll shorten it as much as I possibly can.
We got time.
B.B. King actually listened to Bluesville. First of all, B.B. King was always into technology. He was far ahead of the public in terms of technology. He had tape recorders on his bus long before anyone had tape recorders in their homes. He had television on his bus long before anybody was able to do that. When he heard of satellite radio, he bought a receiver almost as soon as they were available. And he came across the blues channel, my blues channel, and really enjoyed it. So a few years after we had been broadcasting, I had an opportunity to go to a show that B.B. King was at, and I got a chance to meet him. And it's a story. I'll save it if someone wants to hear it. I'll be glad to tell it later. But through that, we were able to cut a deal with B.B. King that he would do 41-hour shows with me. And so I flew to his house in Vegas 6 different times, sat at his dining room table 6 hours, 2 days in a row, each of those trips, and recorded BB and myself talking back and forth, and then brought that back and we turned it into a radio show. The third time I was there, BB had a rack of Lucilles, 6 or 7 Lucilles to the right. And at that point, he turned to me and said, "Bill, I want you to go over there and pick out one of those guitars for yourself." And I looked at him. I was really gobsmacked, honestly, the idea. And my mother always taught me, if someone offers you something that you think is too much, be polite and say, "No, I can't take that," the first time. So I said that, and BB goes, "No, I insist. I want you to have one of these." My mom taught me, if they insist the second time, you be polite and you say, "Yes, thank you," and take it. So I said, "Okay, B, thank you very much." And I walked over and I took one of the guitars, and then B tells me the story of how he had 5 or 6 Lucilles. And he said, "Well, Bill, every time my number 1 Lucille needs to go into the shop to be refurbished, they send me a loaner Lucille, and I play that until they send it back. And then they send me my number 1 back, and all these years they've never asked for me to send back the loaner."
Right.
And he goes, "I have selective amnesia, so I forget to send back the loan." And
I think they have selective amnesia too. It's not bad to have him with 6 of their guitars.
Well, like I said to B, I said, "Well, baby, I think it's because you have helped them have the single most popular guitar in the whole world.
Yeah.
That Gibson model has sold more guitars than Gibson has sold of any other guitar. And so B.B. King ending up with a few extra Gibson Lucilles, no big deal."
Yeah, there's someone at Gibson going, "Should we ask him for the guitar?" And then someone who's smarter goes, no, we're not going to ask him for the guitar. Just let him keep the guitar. It's fine. It's fine.
Alex, I'm almost willing to bet that's exactly what it was like. So, he gave me the guitar. He signed it. And I've had it ever since. We keep it in the living room in a guitar stand and look with a little amp by it. I don't play myself, but the idea is that it looks like B.B. King may come downstairs and pick it up anytime and start playing.
That's so great. Next question.
Next one comes from David Brady in New York City. And David says, any good aha memories of hearing new music and then the subsequent, I told you so response later when that said artist or song blows up?
So let me say, first of all, I work in non-commercial community radio. I did blues on XM. So blow up is a different definition than most people might think of blow up. They don't hit, none of them ever hit the charts. We're number one with a bullet, none of that stuff, because it's in a much, as I said, much smaller pond. But there have been any number of artists. When I got to XM and started Bluesville, what I found and realized was there had never been a nationwide blues channel before. So what I discovered in communities all over the United States and Canada, shout out, by the way, to Edmonton. I've been to Edmonton to the Blues Festival up there. I meant to say that in the last question. I found that in all these communities, there was at least one, if not more, blues acts that had been playing in these communities for decades, but they weren't known nationally. There was no vehicle for that. They might have been locally popular. They may have even moved out to a regional basis, but there was no national footprint to get them out there. Lo and behold, here I come, and I have that ability because of the technical abilities of satellite radio. So that there were a number of artists that I got to play nationally that were known locally that ended up becoming very popular within the blues world. The thing I never had was, I told you so. I've never liked, I told you so. I don't care in what aspect, in what way. First of all, I never believed it was my talent that made somebody a star. It was their talent that made them a star. So me saying, well, I told you, I knew, this sounded like I was sort of holding on to someone else when it was their talent. So I told you so wasn't something, but there were a lot of acts. Geneva Magnus, I could name a lot of blues acts that unless you're in the blues world, you might not know. But I feel very good. And one of the great things of doing what I did was to give them a larger footprint and they get out there and really be able to tour nationally.
Yeah. And I think that, I do think though in the music industry, it was really, I was talking to a band a couple months ago and I said, you've got really good music. You've got a couple songs here that probably could be singles. You're going to need a break. Like, it's never going to be the music. Like the music it's table stakes. Like you have to have a great song or a great couple songs to get in. Somebody in the industry is going to have to go, I want to push this forward. It was never, so that's what I thought was so exciting about being on a radio station was that you could be that person. Like that you could, there's a couple bands that I first heard because they were in the area that I lived in and I was able to push them forward. And then when you're watching them play in a stadium, you're like, yeah, that was, I don't know. I didn't say I would create it, but I was, you were part of the folks pushing it forward. When they really needed it, and I think that's for a lot of artists, though, that's the power of radio or the power of distribution is the ability to kind of help push the ones that deserve it, that have already figured out that process.
Although that has been dissipated a great deal with streaming and everything else. Alex, let me say, here's how I always saw it. I saw the musician, if you think of it as an ocean, I saw the musicians as whales in the ocean.
Right.
The whole king of the whole thing. I saw DJs like myself as the little sucker fish that swim around the whales, that clean the whales. The whales can't survive without the sucker fish, but the whales are doing the half lifting, the heavy lifting, and the sucker fish are a part of it. Yeah. So I always saw myself as one of the sucker fish, the musicians as the whale.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I got to ask you, did you ever interview Kebmo?
Oh, I'm good friends with Kebmo. I've spent time with him, and he's a fabulous guy, humble, incredibly talented, great sense of humor, and one of my very favorite both musicians and people that I know.
Oh, I'm down.
His real name is Kevin Moore. I even interviewed a guy that maintained he gave him his nickname.
It's so good. It's so good.
Yes.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says, where do you see the role of college and non-commercial radio in today's media landscape? Do you see them as laboratories for new talent or as the tastemakers they were in the pre-social media era?
I think the answer would be both in some ways to that question. I think they are laboratories. You got to get started somewhere unless you go into the schools that teach you how to do radio. And usually everything you learn, you take your first radio job. The program director says, forget all that crap you got in that school. This is how we want it done.
We do that in most industries.
Yes, exactly.
You gotta. We call it unschooling them. We just need to unwrap all of the stuff that they just were given that isn't going to be useful.
Exactly. But so yes, laboratories in that way. Plus, learning how to be comfortable on the mic. I mean, there are things that you can learn and get that experience gets you, and then that's really important. As far as tastemakers, I still think they are, but to a lot less degree. Almost anybody can make music today. Almost anybody can take that music and put it up on a service or somewhere to get it out there. But there still are more people in any given moment listening maybe to a radio station than they are to a streaming service at any given moment or a download service. So they still have that impact, but those numbers are shrinking. Hard pressed to find somebody under the age of 35 that still listens to the radio. I would gather that that's a very difficult thing. Most people, younger kids, radio means nothing to them. Their friends and are the drivers of what to listen to. Hey, best friend said they heard this song tooling around on YouTube, turned me on to it. Now I'm turning you on to it. So I think the answer is both. But both are shrinking as the whole landscape changes.
How many hours of DJing do you think you had to do before you felt like you knew what you were doing?
I probably did my weekly show 6 months at least before I at least wasn't embarrassed to listen to myself. Quick story.
And then, by the way, that's really good. I became a morning show host in Pittsburgh before I knew. I mean, when I was still a morning show host, I was on the weekdays instead of the weekends. I was still pretty much like someone's going to say you got to stop doing that until about halfway through that. So it took me hundreds and hundreds of hours to get to a point where I felt like I could do it.
So for me, I started doing my radio show. I did it for 2 months, and the person who was programmer at that point called me in and said, "I want you to make a cassette of your show, listen to it, and come back and tell me what you think." Yeah, very painful. So I make the cassette, and every time I took a break, it sounded like this. You're listening to the next song is and I was an after every few words, and I went back into her and I said, I'm quitting. This is horrible. I can't believe this is what I sound like. You need to take me off the air. I'm embarrassed. And she goes, no. You're running too far ahead of the horses. Try the next time you go on the air. Now that you know you do this thing, you'll be amazed how often you can catch yourself before you do it. So the next show I recorded it and I was only saying once a sentence. And eventually I got to the point where I wasn't doing it at all anymore. And so listening back was absolutely crucial for growth. Someone telling you something isn't the same as hearing it yourself. And once you notice what is wrong, I believe you can start to make the changes and then you get better.
Next question.
Dave Troutman out of Edmonton, Canada. Did your approach to on-air change with the introduction of computers to run the show?
Yes, because with the introduction, and I had done a little bit with computers before I got to XM, but once we got to XM, everything was on computers. Because originally when they hired and said, okay, you're the program director, you'll be the only host. And I'm going, this is 24 hours a day. How can I be the only host? This isn't. But once computers were possible and you could get a 24-hour printout of what the music's going to be, and then you could voice track and drop your voice in the times you weren't live. A single person could do 24 hours with the computers.
How many hours were you live?
I was live 5 hours a day on satellite radio. And the rest of the time it sounded live, but I was voice tracking. Now, eventually, they let me have another person that voice tracked for me, too. He never was live. I was the only live host. The rest of them.
And was it 5 contiguous hours, or was it 2 in the morning?
5 continuous hours. Usually, I was doing the afternoon from noon to 5 or 1 to 6. kind of thing shift. That was my live shift program. Another place where it really changed was one of the nice things about radio, of course, there are no pictures. So I go to a break and I need to talk about a musician that was from 100 years ago. I didn't know a whole lot about. Here's a computer right in front of me. I dial up his name. I go onto the internet. Here's a whole printout when he was born, all kinds of information about him. And then I could pick and choose what I wanted to say and tell the audience. Well, I go out in public and people come up, you know more about blues than anybody in the world. And it's like, no, I honestly don't. I know a lot of people that know more than me, but they don't have a computer in front of them so they can read off of it when they tell you the information. Right. So that was another way that computers made a difference. They also made a difference in terms of editing the music. I'm old enough that we use a razor blade, a wax pencil. You cut the tape right.
The infamous,
and then a piece of tape slips on the floor, and you look down, and you needed that breath, that bit you just cut out. But on the floor is another 70 pieces you've already cut. Now you're trying to figure out which was that piece. So that's what I come from. With the computer, you just go in. You open up the space, you drop your voice. Oh, made a mistake. That little place, you can take that out and put it right back in a second. There's no editing. There's no tape. There's editing, but none of that time-intensive work of doing it. So those are three examples of big difference once computers came along.
Yeah, for me, I bought Pro Tools about 3 months after it was released, and for about, I think it was $6,000 if I remember, all the stuff that I had to buy with it and everything else. And as a DJ, it was a lot of money to do it. And I had seen one demo of it, and I was just like, oh, because I had been doing, I'd spent years doing the 45 or for a transition, and like all that stuff. And it felt like it was a whole new day. And you would do things that you would never do with tape, right? I mean, because you could now. That's what changed it. What I realized was not how much faster I got, but also how much more creative I got with a computer.
Sound effects, the whole 9 yards. You could do. It's amazing. And so, yes, computers have been fed. Plus, all of a sudden, I had a library of 50,000 songs at my fingertips at once. An artist comes up. Johnny Winter used to come in to my show, and he loved to play Stump the DJ. He would come in with a list of songs that he thought there's no way I had access to. And lo and behold, type it right in, boop, up it comes, and Johnny Winter's mouth would just hang open. How did you find? Dude, I got a computer that can go when we got all this music on it. It's just that simple.
In 1999, what was that computer?
What were they using? It was the system was Dialet, Dialet. It was developed by a company in Israel. NPR and us were the first companies to use it. Honestly, the computer stuff it was just a little laptop studio. In the computer room, it was like miles and miles of whatever was in there.
Right.
I'm not very technical, so I don't have that answer for you.
Absolutely. Next question.
David Brady's coming back to us from New York City. Program directors have the power to shape the vibe of a station. What are some challenges to remain neutral, enforcing personal taste, and yet avoid succumbing to industry trends? And he uses a little quote here with the Hendrix spelling. You can listen to Jimi, but you can't hear Jimi.
So I'm not sure what he means by a neutral stance. If it was news, I understand sort of what he's getting at. But if I'm doing a hard rock channel on commercial radio, then everything I play is going to be hard rock. I might have my favorite artists of it, but to fill up 24/7, you're going to have more than just your favorite artists. It's just you just can't go. So you're sort of part of just the nature of how much time you have to fill means that you have to be broader in terms of what you're going to play than just your own narrow personal taste. On the other hand, the greatest program directors are the ones that I believe, have a personal taste and have a knowledge of what they're programming, and they bring that to the air and to the situation. When I was program director at what community radio stations, my biggest job was the decision of who to put on the air, because we trained people from the community to do their own shows. It wasn't professional DJs. We would have 90 different people on the air every week, each doing their own show. So the key for me was to put the people on the air that were going to eventually have something to say or knew a lot about the genre of music that played that would become that the audience would want to hear. Once they hit the air, it became a lot more difficult to make the changes and get people to do what you wanted them to do, because they're already on the air. And when I first became program director, somebody did something that I absolutely was not allowed to have. They played a song that had one of the 7 dirty words in it. And I went into the air room after the song played, and they had another song, and I told them, you can't do that. If you do that again, I'm going to have to suspend you for a while. Walked out, and then she immediately locked the door. And then the next hour and a half of her show, every time she opened the mic, made sure to say something nasty about me for the next hour and a half. And so it was all over. I learned the lesson. You wait till they're off the air before you correct them. You don't correct them while they're on the air, because they're going to kill you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that when I was I was in alternative rock, which is what when I was a music director, and we all focused. There was one guy that really had more leverage than the rest of them, because we were in R&R Parallel. So we, all of us had some influence on the charts. But Mike Halloran in 91X in San Diego, we all watched what Mike did. And if Mike put something in his list, we took it pretty seriously. It didn't mean we'd add it, but we'd listen to everything he did, and whatever that was. Were there any people like that for you in the blues, where you're watching other program directors or music directors that are if they like something, I at least need to consider it?
I didn't. There was never nobody in blues was ever publishing a playlist weekly or daily, so you could see what they were doing. There was a conglomerate of all of us that would send something to a magazine called Living Blues, and then once every other month they published but that's 2 months out. I mean, You have 2 months to fill. You couldn't wait on that. The important thing was getting together, radio conferences. So a bunch of blues programmers get together, and you're just sitting around talking, and someone says, by the way, have you heard so-and-so? And you said, no.
Did bands come to that? Did bands come play for you when you're in those radio conferences with the program
sometimes
directors?
But honestly, most of it was geared to radio. We weren't doing so much having bands come in and play. It was mostly geared about radio people talking about radio.
Right.
Was the focus. And so those recommendations were really helpful. If someone would turn you on to something, or a program director that I was good friends of might say, hey, I just got this, call me up and say, I just got this record. It's really fabulous. You should give it a listen. And I would go give it a listen. But ultimately, in the non-commercial public world, you're pretty much your own captain. And eventually you hope that your taste, and that was a little scary when I started at XM. I wasn't sure my taste was really going to hold for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But ultimately I found out that, okay, I've done this long enough that maybe I did learn something, and it's okay.
That's great. Next question.
Rion Smith is coming to us from Trinidad in the West Indies. If you had to start a radio show now, quote unquote, where would you do it? On YouTube, audio only platform, podcast, or something else?
So I've had offers to do some of those things on all those formats. I've turned down most of those formats because the audience is so small. And so the intensive work it takes to produce something that eventually is going to be listened to by 200 people, as opposed to me going to the radio station. I go right now once a week and do a 2-hour show, and there are 10,000 people listening at any given moment. It makes it very difficult for me to get excited about programming for 300 people, or YouTube, where you just drop it and you hope somebody comes along to listen to it or watch it. I understand that's the future, but I'm back to the past. I'm old enough. That's where I got my start and where I lived in music. And honestly, I have enough ego to want an audience. I don't necessarily mean number one, but I would like people listening. When I did my show from noon to 3 in Columbia, Missouri, at 2:30 in the morning, there were times I doubted anyone was listening. I even would go out of my way to play things that I know were awful just to get phone calls, and sometimes I got no phone calls. So I didn't want to do radio or that kind of thing for nobody or for very few people. You know, I think podcasts is something that is now and of the future. So that would be something I would look at. I don't know that YouTube would be high on my list. I might try to convince one of the streaming services, hey, I can do this pretty well. Why don't you let me do something on your stream that is geared to what I know? And let's see if that doesn't work.
Go ahead, Courtney.
That answers that question.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you are starting in radio these days, how would you handle licensing if you want to bootstrap yourself up? And all the stations that you worked at, Bill, you know, you never have to deal with that. The station handles the overhead and the copyright clearances and the BMI, you know, subscriptions.
Right.
If you want to start that as a single person, how could you do that?
You need to make sure you have some kind of money put aside to pay those rights. I mean, there's no one, and they may seem high, they may seem unreasonable, they may make you angry, but I'm going to go back. At least a percentage, and nowadays even a better percentage of that money ends up in the artist's hands. And if you're doing especially if you're doing music, that's what I know best. But if you're doing music, if the artist can't make a living, then they're not going to make music. If they're not making music, I guarantee your audience does not want to hear you for 2 hours talk about something and not play music. None of us are that fascinating. Well, that's not true. Maybe Howard Stern is that fascinating or that entertaining, but most of us are not that. And so that's a very difficult question. Money is a factor, and you just can't think, oh, I can do this cheap or it won't cost anything. That's not true. It's not going to work that way. In terms of like public radio cut deals so that the big public radio paid the rights to BMI, ASCAP, so the individual stations didn't have to do that. I'm not sure that holds true in the digital world right now. I think individual stations are being responsible for their own digital rights. So that's a factor for everyone.
Next question.
Robert Linkman in Belmont Shores, California, is taking us back to early tech. Do you prefer an audio console with linear or rotary pots?
I prefer linear, although I did work originally with rotary pots, but I prefer linear. I think they're more accurate, both in terms of what you see and also in terms of how you visualize it on the board, as opposed to turning this thing in a circle. And they never were the difference between the different space between 5, 6, 7, and 8. The increments in between that are really important sometimes. And there was no information in terms of how to get that exact. The slide pots, as we call them, I find were much more accurate and much easier for me to use. So I prefer those.
See, I found it very satisfying with the rotary pot when you're mad to go like this, just shut that thing off. So that's the only advantage there.
Well, you still can do it with the slide pot. You just slap it.
Yeah, but then it rips off. Like the rotary pots, they can handle a lot of stress. So
you should have put Q at the bottom
so much
of
you
the
can do with
sliders.
the spin of your wrist. Next question.
Chris Clark in Tempe up next. Do you have any stories about backup singers, sound guys, guitar techs, or other support personnel who made a difference in supporting blues headliners?
Well, not just blues headliners. As an artist or someone that, if you're ever on stage, the one person you never want to piss off is the sound engineer. Ever, ever, ever. Because they have ways of making you sound awful that you'll never understand. But my favorite story of a sound guy was a good friend of mine who is a live and sound engineer. And I would watch him mix shows, and I'd watch people come up to him, and one person would come up and say, "Man, it's really too loud. Can't you turn it down a little?" And I'd watch him on the far right pot, and he'd bring it down just a little, and they'd walk off thinking, "Wow, that's great. It's not so loud, and it's great." some guy would come up behind that person and go, "It's too soft. Can you bring up the singer? We can't hear him." He'd go to that little same slide pot and bring it up a little, and that person would walk off and go, "That's much better. I can hear him now." So after, in between sets, I went up to him one time and I said, "What's the deal with this last slide pot?" He said, "Dude, that's not connected to anything. That is just so that the person that comes up and asks me to change something sees me do something that looks like I'm doing what they ask, so they can walk off and think it's change and it's okay now."
It's great. The cat's out of the bag now. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. I read an article about a college radio station that requires new DJs to not play digital music. Do you think that the use of automation in radio decreases creativity? And he's got a link there to a radiosurvivor.com article.
No, I don't. I think there's a danger that it can become a crutch. And if you're not careful, you can sit there and just sort of go on automatic pilot and just let the computer just run and do its thing. But if you are somebody who really cares and it's your show and you want it to be what you have created, then I believe that what computers do, it means, like I could program a station 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just by myself. That just wouldn't be possible in the old days. I mean, just not possible. So I think that computers are used, if you use them as a tool to help, as opposed to something that just flip it on and have it run everything, then I think they're fabulous. The alternative I don't find so appealing.
Next question.
Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois. Were vocal exercises ever a part of your routine in preparation for on air?
No. Again, I came out of community radio, and our goal was not to have everybody sound like they have the biggest voice in the world and all male, deep voices. That wasn't what we wanted at all. We really wanted people to sound like your next door neighbor, because they were your next door neighbor. We were training people out of the community how to use the equipment and then putting them on the air. If you're talking about my voice personally, that is all based on my mother and father. It was all inherited. This is the voice I was born with. I didn't change it for radio or try to make it become something else. We didn't want that in community radio. We may have worked with people a little bit about breathing and how to be more comfortable and use the mic, but we wanted women to sound like women, guys to have different kinds of voices. We weren't looking for one voice fits all. And so my experience is, no, we didn't do very many voice exercises. I did hardly have ever done any. And I don't know how useful they are, except that maybe for some people it makes them comfortable and relaxed before they get to the air. And if that's the case, then it's a good thing and you should use it for yourself.
Now, on the days, we all had these days, you come in and you got a cold. What do you do? What did you do?
I talked very little, played more music, and depended on, we used to call them carts, but promotional messages and that kind of thing. And I told the audience straight up, sounding a little nasal here, I'm a little bit under the weather, instead of trying to hide it and make it something everybody understands. We've all had a cold sometime in our lives. And again, I just found that the audience responded much better to being honest and letting them sort of in behind the mic than pretending that they didn't get to see anything behind the mic and there was magic going on. I wasn't the Wizard of Oz. I knew that my rear end was hanging out if anyone looked.
I had this little thing that was just it was a little tube of wasabi, and I used to take a little like a centimeter of it and throw it in my mouth, and it would just crush my head, and then I could talk perfectly for about 3 minutes. So I would do my hit, and then I just wait for the next hit and do it. I go through like half that tube in one show, and but it's
try that trick.
It's a very painful way to sound clear during having a cold. But I was like, it must sound clear. Anyway, next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas is up next. What's your advice for the folks at KUHS in Hot Springs, Arkansas, who want to rebuild everything and put in all new gear, a new transmitter, new computer networks, and software?
I hope you got a lot of money. I hope
you're not attached to getting it back.
Yes, finance. I hope you have the financing. I mean, I'm going to say I really all the technology I believe are tools. They are not the be all and end all. The be all and end all is the person on the other side of the mic that's spinning the records, doing the interviews, getting the guests. The technical stuff for me made that possible, but it wasn't what it is about. And I think too often we get caught up, oh, this isn't the best mic. So what? Be the best you. That's what's most important. The audience doesn't know whether it's the very best mic. They can't even see the doggone thing. So, I mean, I think we get too hung up sometimes. If you can afford all the brand new whistles and bells and brand new equipment, more good on you. I never worked at a place besides XM that had that.
Right. It is nice when you walk into a big station and suddenly all those cheap things that you had are just all pretty and all the lights are on and you feel like you've made it. So
exactly.
I got that experience for about 3 months and then I was.
And I got that at XM, walking in and there were 64 studios in one building and it was like jaw dropping and it was all brand new.
Yeah. Gorgeous. Bill, thank you so much for your time.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me and best of luck to everyone. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so great to have you on. And thanks to our panelists who make this show possible. So the panelists are there, first hour, second hour, answering your questions every day. Thanks to all the viewers, our producers who ask the questions. And this is a really short show without your questions. So throw those questions in all day, every day, and we'll keep on working through them. We've worked in over 55,000 of them so far since we started this show. And thanks to the incredible team on the back end that manages this, that finds great guests like Bill, that makes sure that he's ready to go for the show, that develops the software and the hardware that makes this all possible. This is not a run-of-the-mill Zoom. There's a development team, there's management teams, and we want to thank everybody for your contribution. Now, if we had to walk around and ask these questions on foot, it would have taken us 60,000 miles. We would have covered. That would have been a lot of steps, 97,000 kilometers, and that is 476 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. Thanks, Bill. That was so good.
Thank you.
So good to have you.
Excellent, Bill. To make you feel at home.
Bananas for scale.
Yeah, there's a lot of, the exact measurement is complicated because there's a lot of arguments about the imperial banana scale, and some people have wanted to make it more impressive, turn it into a plantain because, we would get a little extra, we'd get a higher number, but we're sticking with Chiquita.
Would you get a higher number? Plantains are longer than bananas.
No, they're shorter. They're little plantains.
Oh, okay.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe there's longer ones. Exactly. We've stuck with the Chiquitas.
All right. United
the Imperial
Chiquita,
Chiquita, not the Patrick Chiquita.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, guys.
All right, see ya.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks, Bill.
Marty, thank you for all your help, by the way.
Oh, it was so worth it.
Thank you very much,
Great
y'all. I'm going to sign out here so you can get to the next guy.